hello everyone, and welcome to the kickoff of a series of conversations we will be having about the true reality in Rwanda. My name is Denise Zaneza, and it is my pleasure to be your host on the upcoming topics regarding the ongoing human rights violations, the oppression, the closed political space in Rwanda, and much more about Paul Kagame's brutal dictatorship. While Paul Kagame's regime is portrayed as a model of success and democracy, the reality is very far from the picture we are used to seeing in the media due to the strong and very expensive PR machine behind the scenes. Freedom of speech, freedom of association, and freedom of expression are essentially non existent in modern Rwanda, and this situation is mainly enforced by severe punishment towards any dissenting voice. Rwandans are being killed, tortured, and imprisoned for political reasons. Those who dare to speak out against injustices have disappeared, some disposed of their properties, jailed, or forced into exile. Despite his long record of human rights violations, Paul Kagame still has major support from the so-called international community and from a number of Western leaders who claim to stand up for human rights, rule, rule of law, and democracy. To help us navigate this complex topic, we are joined by a distinguished guest, Peter Verlinden. Peter is a Belgian politician, lecturer, author, and journalist who brings a wealth of knowledge and insight to our discussion. Good evening, Peter. Welcome, and thank you for being here today.
Good evening to you, Denise, and good evening to everybody listening to us.
Hello, Peter. Thank you for being here. But before we dive into our conversation, for those who don't know you, who is Peter Verlinden?
Well, it's a long story maybe, but the most important is how I was involved in the Rwandan files. I started as a radio journalist in 1987. And in 1989, I became the spokesman of the Belgian Minister of Cooperation Development. And in that function, I got very quickly in contact, of course, with the older, let's say, the former Belgian colonies, Congo, Rwanda, Burundi. And in that function, I was very close to the invasion of the RPF in 1990, because I stayed in that function till 91. And as a spokesman, I had access to a lot of information that normal, between brackets, journalists cannot have an insight in. So in 1991, after my period as a spokesman, I became journalist at Belgian television. Dutch-speaking part of it, what is called now VRT, Flemish Radio and Television. And quite quickly, since I would say beginning of 93, I became, let's say, the one who is responsible for Congo, Rwanda, Burundi, and some other African countries to follow as a journalist. So I was very closely working as a journalist on Rwanda as well. Because of my former period working for the minister and my access to very valuable information on what was really happening in the period, let's say, between 90 and 93, I had a view on what was happening in the country that what was quite different from many other journalists who discovered mostly Rwanda only in 94. So I was working on that, on these files on the Rwanda case and other ones, of course, as well. For many, many years. As a television journalist, I published also some books also about Rwanda and the Congo and about Burundi. And I stopped as a television journalist in 2019. But I'm still working on the same material. I am closely following what's happening on the spot. While I'm, since 2008, I am persona non grata in Rwanda because, of course, of my critical reporting on what was happening or what is happening on the spot. And now, at this moment, I'm still a journalist working for different magazines and news sites from time to time, but only on Central Africa. I was lecturing at the university till 2 years ago, and I'm still giving lectures and conferences. And you mentioned also that I'm a politician. That's a very new task that I took. I was a candidate also on the European list of the Flemish Christian Democrats. I was on the third place, and but I'm still politically active, and I don't know where it will bring me in the near future. That's very shortly, if I can so why I am so involved in the
Yes,
Rwanda files.
yes. Wonderful. Thank you. You're clearly the best person for this topic. Peter, we have all seen the Rwanda Classified. It is a project by Forbidden Stories, where several journalists representing several media outlets in several countries have investigated the pattern of repression in Rwanda. This project mainly focused on human rights abuses, press freedom, political repression, and international relations. Clearly, this is nothing new for Rwandans, of course, or anyone who follows closely what goes on in the Great Lakes region of Africa. I personally applaud the work done and the way it was done. This is something we had never seen before, and it came as a bombshell for Kigali. For the first time, Kagame was exposed in a way we have never seen before. But Peter, as a journalist yourself, what did you think of Rwanda Classified Project and its impact on the regime of Kagame?
Well, as you mentioned already, in fact, for those who were and are still following the Rwanda files very closely, there was not so much new in it. Which was new, but of course the big difference or the big issue is that the fact that it's now published in a way as it is now in 17 countries, in so many news outlets, and also in mass media that before didn't take so much care about the real nature of the Rwandan regime.
Yeah.
What is new is especially the fact that it is published, but also, and that's for me one of the most interesting aspects of Rwanda Classified Stories, is the fact that it was made by journalists who didn't work on Rwanda so much before. Of course, they consulted other journalists. I was myself also consulted, and I was also interviewed as well by the Flemish part of that journalistic work, which was published in Knack or NEC magazine,
Yeah.
and also for what was published in Holland in NRC Handelsblad. So I gave interviews on my experience, but they checked everything, for example, what I was telling them, they checked it with other sources, and they had also access to sources that are not so evident, not so easy to have access to. For example, politicians working on this material, or even institutions like, for example, the Belgian military information services, who are also working on the Rwanda dossier, on the Rwanda files. And that all makes that they brought elements together that were not for once brought by what are so easily called opposition journalists or critical journalists, or, as Kigali is telling, negationists or genocidaires, or whatever they're telling about everyone who is critical for the regime. But it was published by people who normally don't work on that kind of dossier, and that was the new one. And I think to put your second question, or to answer on your second question,
Yeah.
that that was the main reason why for Kigali it was very embarrassing. Because when people like me or Judy Reaver or Michaela Wrong or some others all over the world were publishing things about what's happening in and around Rwanda, also their actions in eastern Congo and so on. Very easily they were debunked, saying, yeah, these are negationists, these are against Rwanda, you know, that kind of reasoning.
Yes.
But in this case, it was very difficult for the Rwanda regime, for Kigali, to say simply that everyone working on Rwanda classified stories that it was anti-Rwanda, because this was even the striking example, of course, is what was happening in Le Soir, the French language newspaper in Brussels. The main newspaper, I would say, not only in Brussels, but even in French-speaking part of Belgium. It's a very important newspaper. Well,
Indeed.
mostly what is and was published about Rwanda was written by my colleague Colette Braakman. But now, for once, it was written, thanks to that international collaboration, it was written by other journalists, and Colette was put in a very difficult position, because
Yes, and also Richard.
she had we know that from time to time, and even more than once, she was defending the position of the Kagame regime, or she was at least minimalizing some news about people who were disappearing or people who were killed and so on. Even in the case of Paul Rusesabagina, she took a position which was quite ambigu, not very clear, not very straight. And now, for once, she had to admit that based on the work of so many journalists worldwide, that maybe she made some mistakes, or she didn't give a good analysis, or not a complete analysis. I don't want to exaggerate, but at least it was another way of looking at the Rwanda files than we read in Le Soir before. And it was also the case, especially because I'm Dutch speaking, as many of you will hear. I was also following, of course, what the Dutch press was doing with all this. You must know that in Holland, most media, and especially the authorities, are quite in favor of the Rwanda regime. They are very hesitant to have a critical, to make a critical assessment. But now in this case, it was NRC Handelsblad, which is a leading newspaper, who was publishing this kind of stories. And you felt immediately. I was last week in Holland for another also Rwanda-light case, and I felt immediately that this kind of stories is changing the way also that authorities are looking at what's happening by the Rwanda regime. So I think that in fact all this work, while as a journalist I always say you don't have to publish journalist material to change the world, you have to publish it to bring the facts. And it's
Yes, indeed.
it's the responsibility of politicians to change the world, not of journalists. That's my view on the work as a journalist. But anyway, we can see, we can observe that indeed this work has confirmed, I would say, the changing view of many countries, of many public opinions on the real nature of the Rwandan regime. Yes. Yeah.
All right. Thank you. You just mentioned that the authorities are now starting to look in a different way at the Kagame regime. So the fact is, the fact that these Western media are exposing Kagame, does this change anything regarding, or is it going to change anything regarding the partnerships and the collaborations between Kagame and some Western leaders? Because when you look around, just a few months ago, the European Union signed a memorandum of understanding on sustainable raw materials value chains, while perfectly knowing that Rwanda is getting the majority of those minerals from DRC through looting, raping, and killing civilians. So, and we also have the UN peacekeeping missions. There's also the Rwandan troops in Mozambique protecting, if I'm not mistaken, the French economic interests, especially the Total Energies group. We have the UK trying to pass this Rwanda bill to, well, I think it already passed, to send refugees to Rwanda. So the main question remains, how come that despite the overwhelming evidence of Paul Kagame's brutality and crimes inside Rwanda and outside Rwanda, the Western countries continue to collaborate with him, and there are still no sanctions like for other dictators that we know of?
Yes, I think things are changing. But things are changing slowly, as is always the case when there is when external partners, or in this case mostly international big powers, are aiming to get a regime change. This doesn't go fast, but things are changing. If I may, I would like to give a small comparison with what I lived from very closely, which was the regime change in the Congo with Mobutu. And I was at Belgian Ministry of Cooperation Development as a spokesman, as I mentioned before, at the moment by the end of Mobutu, 89, 90, 91. And at that time, everybody was convinced this is the end of Mobutu. So after the fall of the Berlin Wall, Mobutu was no longer necessary for the European power, or let's say the capitalist or the Western power in Africa. So he was no longer of use. So they let him fall. To say it very very simply, in a
Yes.
simple way. But in fact, what we are living now, as far as Rwanda is concerned, is very similar. You feel very well that things are changing. Let me give some examples. Just today, we learned that the 20 million euro that the European Union wanted to give to the Rwandan army, as they did before, for the activities in Mozambique,
Yes.
at this moment is interrupted. They are not giving it immediately, so that means that inside the European Union there is a discussion about what could be the position vis-à-vis the Rwandan regime. And of course, it's just about the 20 million euro, which is not giving that difference, but there is much more before. It's not very clear for everyone who is not closely following this material. But we know, if you work on the data, we know that cooperation development aid giving to Rwanda is diminishing last years already. And as far as Belgium is concerned, Belgium cut in two the help for Rwanda since 2019. And it was not published. I published it in one
Yes.
article, but it was not widely published because the Belgian Ministry of Cooperation and Development, the Belgian minister, who was at that time still Alexander De Croo, who was the prime minister afterwards, didn't want to give an interview about it. It was too sensitive. There are other things that indicate. For example, Rwanda had today the commemoration of the Liberation Day, as they call it, the 4th of July. Well, there was not any foreign visitor. Of course, they are saying that, they changed for once the way they are doing that commemoration. They kept it inside Rwanda, things like that. But in my view, what's happening is that the Rwanda regime feels very well that if they would have invited foreign visitors on a level of a president or a head of state or a first minister for this commemoration, that probably too much of them would not have come.
Yeah.
And so you feel that there is a changing in the Western behavior towards Rwanda. Of course, let me be very clear. This has nothing to do with the human rights violations inside Rwanda. This has to do with the position of Rwanda in the whole central of, let's say, the Great Lakes region, Central Africa, and the fact that what Rwanda is doing now in Eastern Congo is in fact going too far. Instead of being a factor of stabilization, as Rwanda wanted to be all the time, and as Rwanda was defended also by very important persons like Louis Michel, former Belgian Minister of Foreign Affairs, afterwards European Commissioner. Rwanda, as an element of stabilization, of stability in the region, had should be untouched. Can do what it wants to do. That has changed. Rwanda is seen more and more as an element of instability, as a difficult to control element, because of course it's all about international interests. Do not think that geopolitics, because it's all about geopolitics, as the end of Mobutu was about geopolitics, as the fact that the RPF and Kagame was supported by so many, firstly mostly Anglo-Saxon countries, afterwards also other European countries. All this has to do with geopolitics. So it's about what is the interest of Western countries to support Rwanda, or to support Rwanda no longer, or to support the regimes change in Rwanda, and so on. The whole problem is that, and the big problem, and that I know really from inside sources, is that these European countries and also the United States, at this moment, they don't see a real alternative. And that's a big problem. Because in fact, what Kagame has done last 30 years is he eliminated, he even killed or imprisoned or chased away anybody, any group, any institution who could have been an alternative for his reign. And that's a big problem at this moment. So the Western countries are hesitating more and more to collaborate plainly with the Rwanda regime. And there we have the data who confirm that. Data as far as cooperation development is concerned, data as, for example, now, even if it is only symbolic at that 20 million euro, but the fact only that it's a discussion inside European Union, should we go on with it? And then we, of course, have other elements outside Rwanda playing an important role. For example, the fact that in Great Britain, most probably we will know it now, I think, in half an hour, but most probably,
think it's today.
Yeah, most probably with the elections, it will be the end of the Rwanda deal, because the Conservatives will lose the elections. We don't know yet how much they will lose, but anyway, they will lose. And probably Labour will take over, and Labour has always said that it will not go on with the Rwanda deal. So that, of course, that's a clash for the Rwanda UK relations. And also, don't forget the position of Emmanuel Macron, the French president, who is till now almost the only European leader who is so close with Kagame, because even the other ones, like the German ones and like the Holland ones, they are taking a distance more and more. But Macron was very close, as we all know. But you know also that Macron has big problems inside his own country. He's losing a lot of power. He will most probably lose his parliament with the second round of the elections next Sunday, and that means that Kagame doesn't have no longer all this support inside the European Union. So my assessment up till now is that there is a big change in the relationship between the Western world and the Kagame regime, if you consider over the period of the last, I would say, 10 to 15 years. But that doesn't mean yet that it is the immediate end of that regime, because the big problem for the Western countries is what after Kagame. And I think that the elections, the Rwandan elections of the 15th of July, will of course confirm again the power of Kagame, but it will depend also on how much he will win, between brackets, of course. If he dares constructing a result of, let's say, 99%, of course, it will be completely lose any credibility. If he would play on the game and say, I had, I would say, 83%, maybe some countries will say, yeah, but it worked quite well because you see opposition as a chance in Rwanda and so on. So it will depend also on the hubris, the
way you will behave in these elections.
Yes. I think, of course, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Peter. Clearly, as you say, there are more things going on behind the scenes that Kagame and Kigali want to admit, especially when we saw Kagame himself and many of his supporters saying that Rwanda classified didn't mean anything and that people just hate the country and they hate them, they are jealous. But we see now that there are many things in motion, but slowly, indeed, very slowly, but in the right direction. So especially when you talk about the international aid that has diminished over the years, and the fact that geopolitics play a far more crucial role than human rights. This is something that we should all keep in mind. It is all about interest of countries and not about human rights most of the time. So I don't know if you could share with the audience your thoughts about whether there's a solution to the ongoing crisis, because indeed, clearly the issue goes beyond the suffering of Rwandan populations. Millions of police victims are also affected. We have all seen the ongoing crimes in Eastern DRC committed by the M23, the rebel group that is supported by Paul Kagame. We just saw that there was today, as you said, the European Union that put a freeze on the military aid regarding the troops in Mozambique because of the crimes being committed in DRC. This is, as we said, a step in the right direction, but clearly not enough. And my question is, how many lives need to be lost for Western countries to take serious actions and reverse the situation, even if, of course, what is more important is geopolitics, but clearly this is not a situation that can be sustainable.
Let me be very clear first on the Eastern Congo question. Of course, that dossier is much more complicated than only the implication of Rwanda.
Exactly.
There are more than 140, maybe 150 rebel groups. I was many times in that region, even very closely, and even inside places where some of these rebel groups were reigning. And it's not only a Rwandan story, it's also a Congolese story. And we all know that the Tshisekedi, and I dare saying he doesn't like it. I know him quite well, and he doesn't like that I use that terminology. But I'm a journalist, and I want to be straight for any regime. But I also call it a Tshisekedi regime, because as well as what the Kabila regime did, and before the Kabila's regime, father and son, and before the Mobutu regime, these regimes do not represent the population and are not defending the interests of the population. So it's not because Kagame would leave Eastern Congo, because that's also a quite simplistic view also in some Western political circles that I want to influence now from my political point of view. Are you still there? Hello, hello. Yeah,
Peter,
I think I lost
we
you for a
lost you.
second. No, yeah. Now I'm back. I lost you for a second, or you lost me.
Yes, you were gone.
Okay. There we are again. No, what I was saying is that it's not because if Rwanda would leave the Congo, because it's clear based on the most recent report, UN experts report that more than 4,000 Rwandan, not M23, but Rwandan military personnel is on Congolese soil in eastern Congo. There is no doubt about it. But it's not because if Rwanda would retreat from the Congo that all the problems in the Congo would be solved. But anyway, it's clear, of course, that the role of Rwanda in what's happening in eastern Congo in last, I would say, since end of 96, so almost 25 years, is very, 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 very important. And the Rwanda regime could only survive, or this Rwanda regime can only survive thanks to the smuggling, as you mentioned before, the smuggling of Congolese minerals and to sell them on the world market, while everybody knows that this is Congolese coltan sold in China or to China as if it is Rwandese coltan. So everybody knows. The same for the gold. We estimate that more than 95% of the Congolese gold coming from eastern Congo is sold as if it is Ugandan gold on the Dubai market, Dubai gold market. So we all know that. And if you consider all these facts, your question was what could be a solution? I think I'm convinced that only if on an international level, and I really mean European US, that's the X, European US level. If on that level, the line will be the same, saying that there can no longer be question of handling minerals who are a result of a conflict, as we did with the diamonds, for Western Africa before. Only at that moment, if as well the United States as Europe will conclude, because China will be very difficult to implicate, but if they are staying together, we stop the use of these minerals. That will be, as far as my view is concerned, is the start of a solution. Because you can chase Kagame out of eastern Congo, and it's possible, and personally I think even it's probable that will happen, but that doesn't mean that the smuggling of the minerals will stop. Because the smuggling of the minerals was going on even in all these periods that there were not so much. There has always been Rwandan militaries on Congolese soil, but not so much as today. And I don't believe that if you stop M23, as was done in 2012, that it will be the end of that smuggling, that mafia, in fact, working on Congolese soil just for the profit of the Rwanda regime. So I think that the only real solution would be if as well Europe as the United States, and I must say that the United States last years, for example, also thanks to, a bit difficult to say it in that way, but thanks to the Rusesabagina case, which gave a big conscience in the United States about the real nature of the Rwanda regime. Well, in the United States, there is really a change of mind about the real nature of the Rwanda regime. And Europe, in fact, is a little bit behind. And if Europe and the United States are coming on the same level and they follow the same line and are very strict against the Rwanda regime, for example, in the smuggling of the of the eastern Congolese minerals, then I think that could be a beginning of a change. What's happening inside Rwanda, and of course, me personally as a journalist working on human rights for so many years during my career, I'm very sensitive on that point, but I'm also very realistic. There are many countries in the world where human rights violations are happening and nobody cares. And it's only at the moment that international interests are involved that they are using the argument of human rights, as they are doing now for Russia, as they are doing now for the situation around Ukraine, and then Syria, for example. But human rights were violated in Syria already for many years before
And nobody cared.
and nobody cared. So I don't want to be too pessimistic, and I don't say that human rights activists should stop their work. Not at all. They have to go on. But if your question is when could there be a change in the situation in the Great Lakes region, and especially as far as Rwanda is concerned, my answer is it will be only if interests of the US and Europe will be changed. And that will be mostly linked to the Congolese case and to the fact if it will be possible to find a solution for a real transparent exploitation of Congolese minerals. And at that moment, it will be very clear that Rwanda has to be kept out of that game, and that the Rwanda regime has to sign us. But it will be a very tough work indeed.
All right. Thank you so much, Peter, for your insight on all of this. And indeed, as we said, geopolitics is far more important than human rights. Unfortunately, that is the world we live in. And as we are approaching to the end of the conversation, we will take 2 questions from the audience and then wrap it up. I see that Rugaba Patrick asked the microphone. Let me give him access. Patrick, can you hear me?
Hello, do you hear me? Hello.
I hear Patrick.
Okay. Thank you, Denise.
All right.
Thank you, Denise.
Yeah, go on, Patrick. You can ask your question or give your remarks.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be with you guests today. Hello, Peter.
Hello, Patrick.
I want to first thank you for your contribution when it comes to Rwandan issues. My question to you is about the security of human rights activists and the opposition members in exile. If President Paul Kagame continues to have international support, despite him being a brutal dictator, how can activists, of course, and the opposition members protect themselves, and who can they turn to for protection?
Hello?
Your question, maybe I will repeat the question, Denise, if some other ones didn't hear it. The question of Patrick is...
No, I didn't hear it.
Okay,
no.
I will repeat the question. I heard him very well. Thank you, Patrick, for that very interesting and important question. It's about the security for human rights activists outside Rwanda.
Yeah.
And how you can guarantee or what you can do about that security.
Yeah.
Well, you know, me as a white man, I have, of course, to care less about it, while even myself, I'm hesitating to speak too openly about that point, because it's a very sensitive and delicate, and also a point that needs to keep some secrets. But I can assure you that even for me and my family, we need some protection. So to say that not only my Rwandese friends and colleagues can be afraid. I'm not very easily afraid, but I'm very aware of the dangers. My answer is quite clear, but maybe a little bit easily for someone who is white. I mean, who is not maybe a direct who could not be immediately a victim of some actions. I think what's very important is that, first of all, those who don't have family in Rwanda, because that family can be much more vulnerable than the person itself who is in abroad. For those who don't have families in Rwanda, I could say be as well known as you can. The more well known you are, the more people know what you are standing for, and the fact that you are critical and that you are working for human rights, respect for human rights in Rwanda and so on. The more you are known, the less you are vulnerable. So the more you can be present in even local press, in national press, international press, that you use your voice, the less you are vulnerable, because then people know you. And if something is happening to you, even a small way of, I don't even dare thinking about really a physical attack, but I'm thinking about what's happening on social media and so on. Well, the more the more the other ones will hesitate to attack you, because you know, if you have a big credibility, as for example, me, myself, and also my wife, we are having a credibility in Belgium, in Flanders, and now especially because we are also politically active. That means that we have a whole political party who is behind us. And it's very difficult for the regime to attack us if we are accepted as quite important candidates for the elections, for quite an important political party in Belgium. So that's my first advice. The next advice is, of course, in your personal life, if you want it or not, if you are a courageous person who is publishing, who is going to activities and so on, if you like it or not, you have to protect yourself. You have to take care about with whom you are in relationship, with whom you are alone. It's really, from time to time, I've lived it all for more than 25 years now. You have, and last 10, 15 years most. You have to think each time, would I go there? Will it be a good idea to be there, and so on? But don't let you, how do you call it, piéger? Don't let you stop by fear, because that's what the regime wants. The regime wants us to be so anxious that we don't move any longer. And so that's why I say the first is go out, speak out, show who you are. But I'm very aware that for people who are who have still family in Rwanda, it can be difficult. But there is no other way, I'm afraid.
All right. Thank you so much, Peter, for your advice. I hope the activists and opposition members who listened or who will listen will take notes. Indeed, fear is your most important enemy, but it is also very important to protect yourself, your family, and give yourself means to do that. So the second question we will take is from the chat. I saw that the Rwandan editor, I think it's a newspaper, they asked if Western media and Western decision makers are as independent as we think, because the truth about ongoing human rights violations and transnational repression is known, and yet we don't see it a lot in the Western media. And I think this is a good question, but I think again it comes to the geopolitics and
yeah, but it's a very I'm sorry, but it's a very complicated question, because I've been lecturing for 14 years at the university on a level of the Master of Political Science, on these questions. How independent are we as journalists in the West? Let's say in the journalists in what we could call the free world. Well, in principle, we are free. And there is, in most cases, I will say in most, I don't say that it cannot be any exception, but in most cases, there is no longer, and I especially say no longer, but it is because it changed in last, I say, 20, 25 to 30 years, there is no longer a direct influence from the political authorities on what is published in the mass media in the so-called free world. So in that sense, you would say, oh, we are all happy, everybody can publish what he, she wants. But there is another phenomenon which is not so much known, but very important to understand why so many mass media, especially in the Rwanda case, followed for so many years what we call in our academic expressions, we call it the official narrative. So the story about Rwanda and the Rwanda regime as it's published by the political authorities in most countries. And as I told before, that is changing slowly on, but it's still there in many cases. And that official narrative was, of course, as we all know, that the genocide was stopped by the RPF regime, that the war started between brackets in 1994, that RPF came up to stop the genocide, that RPF installed a reconciliated country, that there is economic welfare, that everybody had access to the mutuality, and so on and so on. All these stories were mostly blindly followed by mass media, only not by me, which made my my work from time to time difficult because I didn't follow that mainstream, because I had other and, in my view, more credible information. But why did these mass media do that? For the simple reason that these are mass media. And mass media we call mostly mainstream media. They follow the mainstream, and we know it from academic research for decades already, from the 60s on. We know that mainstream media are mostly following the line of the political authorities of their own country, as long as within these political authorities, as long as these political authorities are staying on the same line. When there is an opposition inside the political authorities, also the mass media of that country will bring also the opposition voice. But you must be, and that's an academic assessment, we know it from research for so many years, and it's of course not only about Rwanda, it's the same case in the time about Mobutu, and now about Ukraine, and about Gaza, and so on and so on. And it has a long explanation that I cannot bring tonight. If ever you are interested in that, we have to spend a whole hour about that. But it's interesting to know the conclusion. The conclusion is that in case of international conflicts, and that was and is still my specialty as an academic, because I gave lecture, I was a professor about that at the university. In international conflicts, we know that mass media tend to follow the line of their own authorities. And that's what's happening in the Rwanda case as well. And so that means that, in fact, the agenda, what we call in academic world the agenda setting of the mass media, is not done by the media, but is done by the politics, by the political world. And it's only at the moment that the political world is having more and more another view on a certain dossier, on a certain case, only at that moment you will see that mass media are also changing their view and are bringing more nuance, more differences, and so on. And I lived, as I said before, I lived the end of Mobutu, and there we had exactly the same. For many years, Mobutu was also portrayed as, he was an authoritarian leader, but anyway, Congo was in peace, and so on and so on. While other critical journalists said, no, that's not the case. There is this and this and this and this.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a little bit the same in Rwanda. And that's also the reason why I say very often to activists who are consulting me on that point, I very often say, do not work on media. Do not spend your energy in trying to convince certain journalists to change their mind. It's more important that you work on politicians. If politicians get aware of the real nature of, in this case, the Rwandan regime, the media will follow. And and that's also what we are seeing now. And so we are coming back to the beginning. Maybe that's a good by the end of our hour. If you see what's happening now with the Rwanda classified stories, it's exactly the same. What is published there now, last weeks, was unthinkable 10, 15, 20 years ago. So why is it published now? Because the political awareness in many countries about what's really happening in Rwanda has changed. And that makes that also in the media world, people are getting other influences, other ideas, other inspirations, and getting another. If I used, me personally, if I used, let's say 10, 15 years ago, I always use the expression dictator for Kagame. If I made my items for the Belgian television, I used the name the dictator Paul Kagame. And I got a lot of problems using that terminology. And they told me, yeah, how can you say that it's a dictator? I said, yeah, if you just make an assessment of his of the regime and how it came to power and how and that there is no freedom of press, there is no freedom of expression, no freedom, the only conclusion is it's a dictatorship. So he's a dictator. And it was very difficult to use the terminology. I did it, but it was quite difficult. Now, if I now use the terminology dictator as I did before the Holland justice only a week ago, and I simply say the dictator Paul Kagame, nobody is asking a question. For everybody, it's evident.
Everybody knows.
For everybody, it's evident that it's a dictator. So, and that has not to do with the work of the media. That has to do with what is changing in the politics. So, unfortunately, if we like it or not, as politics is reigned mostly by geopolitics in international affairs, in the same way, mass media are steered mostly by the political authorities, and not in a direct way. Maybe I have to add that in a few seconds. It's not because that political authorities are telling the mass media what to do, but because the mass media are following the mainstream. And they are following the mainstream because it's much more easy. If you're working as a journalist for mass media, it's much more easy if you follow the mainstream than if you are going against the mainstream, as I did during my whole career. That's really difficult and asks a lot for you. And that's the reason why most mass media are simply following the mainstream as they are doing in so many other dossiers. That's the explanation. Sorry to be a little bit long, but it's interesting to understand
it was necessary. Yes,
how it works.
It was necessary, and I hope for everyone who didn't know this, that they are now aware of how things work. It's first the politicians and the political power that determines what goes into the mass media, not other media, but especially the mass media. It is determined by the politicians' agendas. So thank you so much, Peter. And unfortunately, I see that there are other people who want to have questions, but for our first conversation, we have only scheduled 1 hour, and we will stick to that. I would like to thank Patrick Rugaba and the Rwandan editor for your remarks and questions. Thank you so much, everyone who has tuned in, and many thanks to you, Peter, our guest. Thank you for being here today.
It was my pleasure. And next time I will be there again, if you like.
All right. Thank you so much. I will close by saying that Rwandans deserve a democratic state, a government that obeys the rule of law. We all know that the Great Lakes region deserves peace. Too many people have suffered, too many people have been killed, and justice is clearly long overdue. It is not only time for the world to know what really goes on in Rwanda under Paul Kagame's dictatorship, but it is also time to speak up against injustice. It is time for the international community to stand on the right side of history and stand up for justice and peace. I believe that collaboration between Western countries and African countries should be based on respect, mutual economic benefit, and of course, humanity. But it won't happen if no one takes action. As we say in Kinyarwanda, Imana ifasha uwifashije, God helps those who help themselves. This is why everyone who believes in equal rights, justice, and rule of law must break the silence, must speak up and stand up against tyranny, against injustice, against the brutal dictatorship of Paul Kagame. See you all next time, and thank you for listening.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.